In 1995, a wage of $19 an hour felt like a rival. It meant a one-bedroom apartment without a roommate, a car that wasn't held together by hope, groceries without a running mental tally, and enough left over at the end of the month to actually notice it sitting there. Today, someone earning $37 an hour, which is roughly what $19 from 1995 is worth after inflation, very often describes their financial life as tight, stressful, and permanently one bad month from falling apart. Same real purchasing power, completely different emotional experience, and almost nobody stops to ask why. The easy answer is inflation, but that's not actually it, because we already adjusted for that. The $19 and the $37 buy roughly the same basket of goods in their respective eras. The honest answer is something less comfortable, and it has to do with what happened to the basket itself and to the person standing in front of it between one decade and the next. I want you to picture a treadmill for the rest of this video because we're coming back to this image more than once. Not a treadmill that's broken, one that's working exactly as designed. You start walking, and the belt gradually increases speed to match your pace. You never actually get anywhere. You just work harder to stay in the same place, and if you stop pushing, you don't coast, you fall. That's not a metaphor for laziness or bad decisions. It's a precise description of what happens to your spending as your income rises, unless you deliberately intervene, and almost nobody deliberately intervenes. Because the treadmill doesn't feel like a treadmill from the inside. It feels like progress. Let's build two people and follow them properly, because the comparison only means something with real numbers attached. Person 1, we'll call her Dana, earned $19 an hour in 1995, working full-time, bringing home a little over $3,000 a month before taxes. Person 2, we'll call him Jordan, earns $37 an hour today, working full-time, bringing home the inflation-adjusted equivalent. Just over $6,000 a month before taxes in today's dollars. In real, inflation-adjusted terms, Dana and Jordan are earning almost exactly the same thing. What differs is everything surrounding that number. Start with housing, because it's the biggest lever in this entire story. In 1995, Dana rented a one-bedroom apartment for around $400 a month, roughly 13% of her gross income. That apartment had a bedroom, a bathroom, a kitchen, and probably not much else. No dishwasher, no in-unit laundry, no gym downstairs, no package concierge. It was a place to live, and it did that job completely. Jordan today rents a one-bedroom apartment that costs him around $1,400 a month, which sounds proportionate until you look at what that unit actually includes. It usually comes with in-unit laundry, central air, a fitness center, a package locker system, sometimes a rooftop deck. Jordan isn't paying more for the same apartment. He's paying proportionally the same percentage of his income for a materially upgraded product that didn't exist as the baseline standard in 1995. The floor moved. Nobody voted on this. It just happened, unit by unit, city by city, as new construction normalized amenities that used to be luxury add-ons. This is the first mechanism behind the treadmill, and it's worth naming precisely. It's called baseline inflation of the standard product, and it's different from price inflation. Price inflation means the same thing costs more money. Baseline inflation means the cheapest available version of the thing has quietly gotten better, and therefore more expensive, whether you wanted the upgrade or not. You can't actually buy Dana's apartment anymore, not because it costs more, but because the entry-level unit itself no longer exists in most markets. The floor rose out from under the choice. The same thing happened to cars, and here the numbers are almost uncomfortable to look at directly. In 1995, a new base-model compact car cost around $12,000. No power windows in the cheapest trims, manual locks, a basic AM/FM radio, and that was completely normal, not a hardship. Just what a car was. Today's base-model compact costs around $23,000, and it comes standard with a backup camera, because it's federally required, a touchscreen infotainment system, automatic emergency braking, and Bluetooth connectivity. Jordan isn't choosing to buy a nicer car than Dana bought. He is functionally unable to buy Dana's car anymore. The regulatory floor and the competitive floor both rose, and every manufacturer building to that new floor passed the cost straight to the buyer. Regardless of whether the buyer wanted a touchscreen or would have been perfectly happy with a knob. Phones tell a smaller but sharper version of the same story. In 1995, Dana didn't have a monthly phone bill beyond a landline, maybe $20 a month, because cell phones were barely a mainstream product yet. Jordan pays roughly $80 a month for a smartphone plan that didn't exist as a purchasable category when Dana was budgeting her paycheck. This one is slightly different from the housing and car examples, because nobody would seriously argue Jordan should go back to a landline-only existence in a labor market that now assumes constant reachability. But the point stands regardless of whether the new expense is justified. It's still an expense Dana never had to account for, sitting quietly inside Jordan's budget every single month, invisible until you actually list it out. Here's where the second mechanism kicks in, and it's more psychological than structural, though it compounds the structural piece perfectly. Behavioral economists call it the hedonic treadmill, and the basic finding, replicated across dozens of studies since the 1970s, is unsettling in its simplicity. Humans adapt to improved circumstances astonishingly fast, and once adapted, the improved circumstance becomes the new emotional baseline, not a source of ongoing satisfaction. The first year with air conditioning feels miraculous. The second year, it's just how the apartment is supposed to feel, and its absence would now register as a genuine hardship rather than a return to normal. This means every single baseline upgrade we just walked through, the in-unit laundry, the touchscreen, the smartphone, doesn't just cost more money. It also stops registering as a luxury within roughly a year of acquiring it, and reverts to feeling like the neutral floor. Jordan doesn't feel richer for having a nicer apartment than Dana had, because from Jordan's perspective, he doesn't have a nicer apartment. He has a normal apartment, the only kind of apartment that was really on offer, and his brain adapted to that baseline within months of moving in. The upgrade evaporated as a source of satisfaction almost immediately, while the cost of the upgrade stayed permanently baked into his monthly expenses. That's the treadmill picking up speed. You don't feel the improvement, you just feel the bill. Now stack a third mechanism directly on top of the first two, because this is where things get genuinely brutal, and it's the piece almost nobody talks about. Healthcare, education, and childcare, three categories that barely register in Dana's 1995 budget and dominate Jordan's budget today, have inflated at rates dramatically higher than general inflation for 3 straight decades. Healthcare premiums have roughly quadrupled in real terms since 1995. Childcare costs, in most major metro areas, now exceed what many families pay in rent. These aren't lifestyle upgrades anyone chose. Nobody sat down and decided that childcare should cost more per month than a mortgage. These are categories where costs rose independently of any decision Jordan made, layered directly on top of the baseline inflation happening in housing and transportation, and layered on top of the fact that his brain adapted to whatever improvements did land in his lap and stopped crediting them as gains. Put all three mechanisms together, and you get the full mechanism behind the treadmill, not as a metaphor but as an actual description of the math. Jordan earns the same real income Dana earned. He's paying proportionally more for baseline goods that quietly became more expensive because their minimum acceptable version improved. He feels none of the benefit of those improvements because his baseline adapted within months of receiving them. And he's absorbing entirely new cost categories, healthcare, childcare, education, that inflated far faster than his wages and that barely existed as major line items in Dana's era. Dana wasn't smarter with money, she wasn't more disciplined. She was standing on a treadmill running at a slower speed in an earlier decade, before three separate forces converged to accelerate the belt underneath everyone who came after her. This is the part where most videos on this topic would tell you to simply spend less, track your expenses, cut the subscriptions, make coffee at home. That advice isn't wrong exactly, but it profoundly misses the scale of what's actually happening, because it treats a structural, three-decade shift in the cost of baseline goods as if it were a personal willpower problem. You cannot budget your way out of a childcare market that costs more than your rent. You cannot make coffee at home your way out of a car market where the cheapest available vehicle costs nearly double what it cost 30 years ago in real terms. The treadmill isn't running fast because you're bad at walking. It's running fast because the machine itself was redesigned by manufacturers, by landlords, by hospital systems, by an economy that quietly normalized adding cost to every floor-level product, and by your own adapting brain that stopped noticing the upgrades almost the moment they arrived. So what actually helps, if the standard advice underaddresses the real problem? The most useful shift isn't a budgeting technique. It's a recalibration of what you're measuring in the first place. Stop asking whether you feel wealthy compared to the current baseline around you, because that baseline is specifically engineered, by three converging forces, to always feel like not quite enough. Start asking a different, more answerable question. Is the gap between what I earn and what I actually need to spend on baseline goods widening or shrinking, year over year? Regardless of how the surrounding standard has shifted. That gap, not your subjective sense of comfort, is the actual number worth tracking, because your subjective sense of comfort is precisely the thing the hedonic treadmill is built to neutralize. There's a practical version of this worth naming directly. When Jordan compares his life to Dana's using absolute numbers, adjusted for inflation, he discovers he's not actually behind. He's earning the same real wage she earned. What changed is the composition of an unavoidable minimum, not the value of his labor. That distinction matters enormously for how you make decisions, because it means the fix isn't earning more, though that helps everyone, and it isn't feeling guilty about a phone bill Dana never had. Because that phone bill buys real functional value in a job market that assumes constant availability. The fix is recognizing which baseline upgrades you're actually choosing, like the rooftop deck you never use, versus which ones you have functionally no way to opt out of. Like a backup camera that's now federally mandated on every new car sold. You can't negotiate with the mandated ones. You can absolutely negotiate with the optional ones, and most people never even audit which category a given expense falls into. Because the treadmill is specifically designed to make every added feature feel equally unavoidable. Here's the exercise worth doing this week, and it takes about 20 minutes. List your 5 largest recurring monthly expenses. For each one, ask honestly whether the version you're paying for is the genuine floor available to you, the cheapest functional option that exists in your market, or whether it includes upgrades you've simply stopped noticing because your baseline adapted to them within the first few months. You'll likely find that 2 or 3 of those 5 expenses have real, actionable slack in them, a car with features you never asked for, a gym membership bundled into an apartment you'd have rented anyway, a subscription that graduated from novelty to invisible without ever delivering ongoing satisfaction. You'll also likely find that 1 or 2 of those expenses, particularly healthcare and childcare if they apply to you, have no meaningful slack at all. Because those categories inflated for reasons entirely outside your control and outside any individual household's ability to negotiate downward. That distinction, between the baseline you're choosing and the baseline you're stuck with, is the only real lever available to someone standing on a treadmill they didn't build and can't simply step off of. You're not going to outbudget 3 decades of structural cost shift. But you can stop blaming yourself for a gap that was never really about your discipline in the first place. And you can start directing your actual attention toward the narrow slice of your spending where a real choice still exists. Dana didn't have more financial character than Jordan. She was walking on a slower belt. Understanding that difference won't speed up the treadmill, but it will change what you're doing while you're on it. And that turns out to matter more than almost anything else in this entire conversation.